Hello, hello, my friends in Sasquatch land. Hello, 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 my friends in Sasquatch land. Tuesday night yet again. And once again, Discover Sasquatch will not disappoint. We have another great show for you tonight. Mr. Brian King Sharp is in the house, and he is backstage at the moment. Brian is the CEO of Paranormal World Productions and the creator and host of Sasquatch Odyssey. So we're very excited to have him here tonight. I have a couple of service announcements before we bring him out. I am continuing the giveaway for another episode, but this week, along with Scott Carpenter's autographed copy, I am also throwing in a mug. And at the end of the show, I will have a Discover Sasquatch mug at that even. Look at that. Designed by yours truly. And I'm throwing that in with the book. So at the end of the show, we'll have Brian pick a word to put in the comment section so you guys all get a chance to enter to win. And then on July 5th, I will announce the winner. And do we have a show for you on the 5th? Discover Sasquatch presents The Hand of Unknown Origin, another Mutt and Jeff adventure. MK and Dom Monroe will be back again, and you will find out if Don actually found a hand of a Sasquatch. So you don't want to miss that one, folks. 7/5/23 is the 4th of July show. And then I have one more announcement. Page 369 is up and going, and we are looking for more audio bites to put on the website. So if you're interested, please send them to discoversasquatch@gmail.com. That's discoversasquatch@gmail.com. And we would like you to be one of the first 50 sound bites on the page. So if you're interested in that, please come on over. And one more. We'll show the latest winner of a sweatshirt, Mr. Steve Wolf. Discover Sasquatch sweatshirt winner. Looking good, looking good. So that's enough of me babbling. Let's bring out our guest tonight from Sasquatch Odyssey, Mr. Brian King Sharp. Hello, hello, hello.
What's going on, Chris?
Not much. How you doing?
I'm hanging in like a hare in a biscuit, man. How about you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thank you for spending some time on this Tuesday night with everybody in the chat and myself. We're looking forward to the interview and learning a little bit more about you. So as we move here, why don't you give everybody a little rundown on how you got involved into the Bigfoot world?
Wow, it's kind of a long story. It started back in my childhood. Most people who've listened to the show have heard my story before. I've been guest on other shows and talked about my experiences. You know, grew up in the North Georgia mountains and grew up a poor kid. So I spent a lot of time outside by myself. You know, I didn't have a sibling until I was 10 years old. My sister's 10 years younger than me. So I was out in the woods all the time. And we fortunately rented a house that had a ton of property next to it. And I would go out in the woods, and I fancied myself a squirrel hunter. I had a BB gun. I think I ended up with a 22 at some point. But I'd spent a lot of time in the woods, and I grew up hearing stories, from my family and the people around this rural area that we lived in, Georgia. And they would talk about, they never said Bigfoot or Sasquatch. It was always, boogers or hairy men or just whatever. You pick the name, they would use it. And I remember a story came up at one point about some ginseng hunters that got ran off of a mountain by what they said was, eventually I figured out, was a Bigfoot. And I was fascinated by that. I loved everything. I loved the Loch Ness monster, any mysterious thing, UFOs and all that stuff just really piqued my interest as a kid. And I was out in the woods one day when I was 12, and I was doing my regular hunting thing. And it was really different that day because I know people talk about this feeling that comes over you when you're around Sasquatch. At times, not everybody has that, but it's just that ominous feeling where the hair on the back of your neck stands up, the hair on your arm stands up. And I just felt like I was being watched. And above the being watched, I felt like I wasn't supposed to be there. I just had this feeling like I need to get out of here and I need to leave now. And I started hearing noises. I was hearing rustling. I heard what sounded like bipedal steps. And it was always just on the cusp of where I could see. I mean, if you've been in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, anywhere in the South where I've grown up and live now, the woods are thick in the summer, right? Sometimes you can't see 5-10 feet in front of you. And this was like really on the cusp of my vision and field of sight. And I was hearing what sounded like bipedal walking. Then it was huffing and growling. And then what I've described it before. The only thing I could really think of calling it is a bluff charge. It felt like a freight train was coming after me, and it would stop just, it seemed like 10, 15 yards maybe into the woods. I didn't stick around long. I probably, that it took me a lot longer to tell you that story than I actually stuck around because this went by really fast. And once the feeling came over me, I was a pretty smart kid, even back then at 12. I was like, I got to get the hell out of here. So I was probably 600 or 800 yards from my house at that point, and I just took off as fast as I could go, hopped the barbed wire fence, got back into the yard, ran into the house, and I didn't tell anybody. My mom was there, but she never asked any questions, and I certainly didn't say, hey, I think I just had an experience with something. And that sort of indoctrinated me, the stories, and then having an experience like that. And the house that we lived in was haunted. There was a whole lot of stuff going on. There was a lot of personal turmoil in the house between my mom and my dad and just family stuff. So I was dealing with a lot. And obviously I'm a prepubescent kid going through all of that. So, and I've even had conversations with people afterwards. I was a guest on a show a couple of years ago, and the guy was into like demonology and all. We were talking about ghosts and other stuff. And he asked me at some point, and I'd never really thought about this. He said, do you think that some of the demon stuff or the demonic stuff or the really evil stuff in the house might have caused what happened to you in the woods? And I was like, hey, I never really thought about that. I just always assumed that it was Bigfoot or something similar to that. I know it was not an animal that I knew because nothing in that area would have done any of the things that I was experiencing. So, it's one of those things where I've never said it's a Bigfoot, but I've just always thought it was. But when he brought that up about it possibly being something demonic or something from the made its way into the woods, I thought that was kind of interesting. But that kind of is what drew me in, and I've just always been interested in the subject. I ended up having to suppress it because I went into law enforcement. I waited. I started working right out of high school. I worked all through high school. And then as soon as I got out of high school, I went right to work full time. I didn't do the college thing until I was 30 or so. And by that time I went into law enforcement. I was a cop. So you don't talk about Bigfoot. You don't talk about aliens. I've seen a UFO. You don't talk about that stuff when you're a cop at work. At least I didn't, because there is some level of concern about going to work. I work for the City of Atlanta Police Department. I was in a huge metropolitan city with a ton of cops, and I did a lot of cases, and I was in court a lot. And the last thing you want is to be on the stand trying to prosecute somebody for drunk driving after they've killed somebody, and somebody bring up the fact that you're doing a Bigfoot page or you're hunting Bigfoot on the weekends. People kind of, we laugh, but people take that stuff and, it becomes a joke. So I kind of suppressed that. And then, I left the police department in 2016, and I didn't have to worry about that anymore. So I could really start diving into looking into the subject. And I really got interested in a couple of podcasts. I'd never listened to a podcast. So I started listening to a couple of Bigfoot podcasts, and I got hooked. It was all about the encounter stories for me. More than the research stuff is really interesting to me. I love to talk to researchers, and I've been out. You and I were talking a couple of days ago about some of the stuff I found on my property. We can certainly get into that later, but it was about the documenting the encounters, because that's what really interests me, is what people are experiencing. Because I started hearing these places that people were having these experiences, and the same person or a person in Florida was having the same experience somebody was having in California, and the same experience somebody was having in Louisiana. And I even heard people from the UK claim that they'd had similar experiences with Bigfoot or something along those lines. So I really thought that that was what I wanted to concentrate on. So it's like, hey, why don't I start a podcast and start interviewing people? I wanted to document cases specifically in this like southeastern United States. I was interested in Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, those kind of places, because I'd lived in Alabama and Georgia and now North Carolina. And the very first person that I reached out to on Facebook when I got into these groups and started trying to find people for the show was a guy right here in North Carolina, 3 hours from me, that had a roadside crossing near the Medoc Mountain State Park area. And I was hooked at that point. I was like, I'm going to document as many encounter stories as I can. I'm going to put them out on a podcast and let people listen to them. And 2.5 years later, it's turned into a full-time job. So that was a really long answer to a short question, but that's kind of what got me into it and brought me to where we are.
But you bring up some good points, because as you know, as talking to many people as you do with the podcast, and me talking to a lot of people doing the podcast, and knowing you hear the same story as them approaching you at a younger age, 10 years old, 8 years old. You hear it over and over again, and then it disappears from your life. I had the same exact experience like you did. I had them surround me, and I didn't know what it was. I didn't know it was a Bigfoot until I had my first interaction 30 years later. That feeling came back to me, and I experienced that same feeling, and now I'm thinking it's a Bigfoot because I'm in the woods looking for a Bigfoot. You brought up a good point that not everything is Bigfoot. And people, not a lot of people practice that, because if you're in the woods looking for a Bigfoot and something happens, it's Bigfoot. And there's, as you know, as I know, that was a tongue twister right there. I kind of choked on that one, but that there is other things out in the forest that, that like you've seen a UFO, and, it could be aliens in the forest. It could be demons. It could be spirits. It could be numerous things. If you don't see it, you really don't know what it is. How do you approach it now, knowing what you do?
As far as just the subject in general, or
the subject in general, how do you approach it now?
Very open-minded. When I first got into it, I was always, it's got to be flesh and blood. And I'm still, you and I were talking about it before we went on the air. I'm still sort of 50-50 with these things, and I always say, if you believe any of this at all, if these things exist, because I say because I've not seen one myself. And until I do, I can't be 100% certain for myself that what I believe to be a Sasquatch or what I see in my mind is real. So, and I don't say that to discredit anybody. I don't have anybody on my show that I don't believe had the encounter that they say they had. I know you've had your own experiences. You've been a guest on my show and shared those. So I don't say that disrespectfully. I'm just talking for me and my perspective. But I was always flesh and blood. If they exist, it's got to be some sort of an ape, Australopithecus, some sort of Australopithecine, something like that along those lines. But as I've done this, and I look today and I'm 330 some odd episodes into the show. So I've talked to a lot of people, and that's just this show. I do like 5 podcasts, right? So if I don't open up my mind to these other experiences that people have and start looking at it in a different way, I'm really doing everybody, including myself, a disservice, right? If it's a flesh and blood creature only, then some of the experiences that people have shared with me have to be something else, because there are these components that go into some of these sightings that I document that could not be just a regular everyday ape in the woods. It's got to be something else. So my approach has changed, and people used to give me guff a little bit on the show because I would talk to somebody and I'd do an episode and I would have an opinion about something. And then I might be on the show a week later interviewing somebody else, and that opinion changed, and I state that on the show. And people are like, "Oh, you're wishy-washy. You're going back and forth. You said last week that you didn't believe that, and now this week you do." Well, that, in my opinion, is a sign of growth and intelligence. If I have this information today and somebody gives me more information and I put that information with what I already know, and if it affects my opinion to the point where I need to change my opinion on something, I'm going to do that. And I do that every single day. So everybody that I've talked to and all these interviews that I've done with people who have had really what would be considered high strangeness going on in their encounters, it's really opened my mind and it's changed my approach. So I go into every single interview and every single conversation at a conference or wherever I'm talking to whoever I'm talking to with an open mind.
Who would you say kicked you into the high strangeness? Who brought you out of the flesh and blood? I mean, like you said, you've done over 300 interviews and one podcast and 5 other podcasts. Who's the one person you talked to that really made the wheels start turning, saying there's got to be something else going on?
Gosh, there's a ton of people that have contributed to that. So it'd be very difficult for me to pick one person, but I would say there's probably been 2 that have been really influential in that. The first interview that I did that really made me think about that stuff was Ron Moorhead. He was one of the first people that I interviewed on my show. I think I interviewed Dr. Jeff Meldrum was like episode 10 of my show. And I think Ron was somewhere like 14 episodes in. And if you have a conversation with Ron Moorhead, I don't care if you're at a conference or if you're doing an interview with him. I've had him on the show now 2 times, and I've met him a couple of times at different conferences and had conversations with him. He will really make you think about your position on where these things come from, what they possibly are, and some of the abilities that they may possess. And I scratched my head and I just sort of brushed it over. And we primarily talked about the Sierra sounds on the first show that I did with him. But this last one, where I had him on a couple of months ago before we went to a conference together here in North Carolina, we concentrated on some of that high strangeness stuff and really talked about some of his experiences. And they're really weird. He's heard things and seen things up at the Sierra camp that just don't make any sense. And I don't think they're separate from the experiences that they had with the Sasquatch there. I think they're sort of hand in hand. I think they're connected. Scott Nelson was on the show, the cryptolinguist who famously broke down and talked about and analyzed the Sierra sounds. I had Scott Nelson on a couple of months back, and Scott and his son had some really strange experiences up there by themselves, right? Waiting on Ron. They had some together, but just a whole lot of strange things going on. The other person that really made me sort of second guess my opinions on things was Les Stroud, Survivor Man. I had Les Stroud on the show, and Les has had some really strange mind speak type, telepathy. I mean, he doesn't like the word mind. He doesn't like the words mind speak. He thinks that's sort of this little neat toy kind of word that's been associated with Bigfoot. It's telepathic communication is what it is. So let's call it what it is, right? But Les is somebody I have a lot of respect for, and he's got a lot of credibility in both fields, right? The Bigfoot field, I think he's approached it in a very, in my opinion, the right way when he's done the research, and his survival stuff. That's where I fell in love with his show and what he did there, because he was asked to cheat on the show and he just refused to. He stood on his principles, and he kind of does that with Bigfoot too. So him describing his really strange encounters with these things where he's heard them talking to him to the point where he said on my show, I thought I was crazy. So he went to a therapist to make sure that he was not schizophrenic. And the first thing the therapist said to him was, Les, if you were schizophrenic, you wouldn't be asking me that question. Right. So you're not schizophrenic. And his therapist actually told him, what you described to me seems to be a gift that you were given. And that was pretty powerful for me. You got a mental health professional telling this guy, you're not crazy. You had that experience. And I think that experience is a gift. So, and then I was talking to you before we went on the air. I had a conversation today with Henry Franzoni. And there's a lot of people in Bigfoot that probably aren't familiar with who Henry Franzoni is, but he's been investigating this stuff for 30 years. Henry is the person who really added Bigfoot to the zeitgeist on the internet. I mean, he started the IVBC conference back in like 1993, and he had the first Bigfoot group that was ever on the internet. I mean, he had Moneymaker and Cliff Barackman and all the people that are in Bigfoot were joining Henry's group. And he's been looking at this subject for 30 years. You know, he did it with John Green, Renee DeHenden, you know, Peter Byrne. He helped start Peter Byrne's database with all the stuff that Peter Byrne has collected. He used to run the 1-800-BIGFOOT call center for people to call in that had a Bigfoot experience. So, but I said all that to say, Henry is one of these people who has had some really strange, I'm talking high strangeness encounters with these things. And he doesn't care if people believe him. He has no dog in that fight whatsoever. And he told me some of those things today. And there's still some stories that he literally would not tell me on the show because he knows how people would respond to those stories, and he won't put them out there just because it is so highly strange. He just doesn't want to put up with what comes after that. Right. So see, I'd say those three people, and then obviously tons of people, you know, that I've had on the show, just regular Joes that are out there having these kind of experiences, and they come on the show and talk about it, you know. And that is the most powerful thing to me, is looking in somebody's eyes like we are now. It's on a computer, but it's still a connection that you have with somebody when you interview them. And you know if somebody's yanking your chain. I was a cop for 16 years, dude. I know a BS story when I see it. I know when somebody's telling the truth and when they're lying. And when I can look at somebody's face and I know that they're being sincere, there is something more to that story. So I'm open. I'm wide open to everything at this point.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that. We talked about that last week. And you can tell by their body language. You can tell they're reliving the story. They're looking over their shoulder. They're pointing to nothing, but they're in the room. And they're like, he was right there, and they're looking over. They're reliving the whole episode, and or they break out in tears, or they do. And that's why I do the podcast. And I'm sure, you know, you do the podcast full time. And I'm sure the only reason why you're not doing it is to make a living. I'm sure you want to learn about them. And that's why we do it. And the more people we can talk to, the more we learn. And then we can help others. You know, we could pass that info along. And that's what you do. And I applaud you for that. And it does take a lot of guts to come out and, you know, talk about some of the stuff. I have stuff that I won't tell anybody. I have a mentor, Al Santoriga, and he helps me through a lot of stuff. He's been doing this for a long, long time, but there's stuff I only tell him, and I'll never tell anybody else, just like your friend there, Day, you were talking about. And I have to agree with him that the after effect with people pouncing and the trolls and the comments, you know, who are they to come at people like that? You know what I mean? And I'm sure you've experienced a lot of that in the hate and the hate mail and the emails. How do you deal with that? How long did it take you to get past the trolls and that? And how did you learn to deal with all that?
I'm definitely not there, man. It is such a struggle for me to this day. You know, when I first got into this, my podcast was a hobby for me. It was an outlet for me. It was me being able to explore the questions that I had about the subject and to connect with people and get their stories, right? And the second you put yourself out there, you know this, you do this show, you've got a ton of subscribers. There's a lot of people that listen to your voice every single week. And anytime you open yourself up to that kind of public display, there are always going to be somebody who wants to tear you down for whatever reason. And, you know, I had a conversation with a very well-known podcaster with a huge show early on, that helped me a lot with the show. And I was struggling with the reviews. People would, somebody will listen to 500 episodes of your show and never leave any kind of a comment. It only takes one time for them to get pissed off about something, and they're going to make it known to everybody in the world what they don't like about you, your show, or whatever the case may be. So he gave me some really good advice and said, never read the comments. And that is easier said than done for me, because it is my full-time job. It is the way that I make a living. And just in that, a lot of people have a hard time with. I've heard people on shows just like this one in other places talking about people who make money off of Bigfoot. They talk about Meldrum or Brackman, whoever goes out and does the circuit and does these Bigfoot conferences. Well, I do the same thing. And those are to meet people. It's to network. There's a whole lot that goes into that. But people get pissed off if you make a little bit of money and scratch out a living. And I'm like, do you go to Walmart and tell the person that's stocking the shelf that they're a piece of crap because they're making money stocking a shelf? No. It's the same thing. It's just my job. The only difference in my job and most people's job is I love my job, and it does allow me to pursue those answers and stuff like that. So, but I said all that to say, I'm still not over it. I still have a hard time getting past the trolls. I can handle the personal attacks. It doesn't bother me as much. What I don't like is when I have somebody on the show and they share something that is deeply impactful to them. It's their experience. It's something they went through. And like you said, there's a lot of PTSD involved in a lot of these situations. And it takes a ton to get some of these people to come forward and show their face and tell their story in the first place. And then the second the show airs, I start getting emails about what a piece of crap they are. That story's not true. There's no way that could have happened. It's all BS. And that's what really ticks me off, because talk about me all you want, have your opinions about the way I talk or what I do or what I don't do or whatever. I don't care about that. But attacking the people that come on the show is really what sets me off. And I've gotten into some really knockdown dragouts with people in private. I'm surprised some of the private messages I've sent people that haven't shown up on the internet, because I get, these keyboard vigilantes, I don't have time for them. And I'm going to stand up for the people who come on my show, because I say it all the time. I've even said it here tonight. I'll say it again. I do not have anybody on my show that I do not believes that they had the experience they share. That's all it takes for me. If they get on the show, I believe they've had some sort of experience, and it is theirs to tell in the words that they use, however they use them. So I'm going to defend them to the hilt. But that was, again, a long answer to a short question. I'm not over it, and I try not to read the comments, and I try not to let it get to me, but I still do.
Yeah, it is very tough, and it still gets to me all the time. And I've been to the point to where I wanted to quit, just quit, because you're in the public eye. You're in the public eye. I'm in the public eye. We have guests here, and you're right. I scan those comments for the guest stuff. I had one last week, and I'll just automatically delete. There just was a face with the roll in the eyes. They do it because I got comments blocked. Then you can block the comments, but then they do the little smiley faces, and they put their little cryptid signs in, and I just think it's cool to share with everybody here tonight that what we have to deal with and how we approach everything. And I think, I think it's pretty interesting. And especially with someone like you who has, thousands of downloads a week. And I mean, you have a really big show. It's a lot of pressure to try and keep everybody happy, but in the meantime, you got to try and keep yourself happy too. And that's a big part of it. Because if you're not happy, you're not going to have a guest on your show that's going to be happy with you. You know what I mean? If you're on here and like, oh geez, man, I don't even want to be here. And well, what's the next question? You can't do that. You got to be up every time. But I was just curious how you dealt with the trolls, because they're not fun. And like I said, they've had me twice almost ready to quit and everything. I mean, just give up Sasquatch, everything. And it's just, that would be giving up 7 years of our lives just to please them. So that'll never happen. They'll never get the best out of me. So let's backtrack a little bit and let's get into some Bigfoot stuff now, because like you said, you had that experience when you were young, and a lot of people had that experience, and now you have this place in North Carolina, and you've been sharing stuff. When I was on your show, you shared a little bit. You said you were starting to gift a little bit with some apples, and you had some weird stuff going on. And now, I mean, what's it been, 3, 4, 5 months? I can't remember. I think January I did the show. Now you have a whole bunch of other stuff coming on. And once you showed me that yesterday, or on Sunday, I'm like, you know what? They're starting to show themselves a little bit more to you. And I told you, like, in my experience is that they pick you. And I believe now, I didn't know that story of you until today about when you were young. So I think they mark you when you're young. I just have that feeling. And that's, again, this is all my opinion. I am not the leader on how Sasquatch works, at all. But you want to fill in everybody how it's progressed at your place and how you came about starting to look at your place?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I really started noticing, that I started posting on any of the social media, and I'll be honest with you, I am hesitant to post anything Bigfoot related or even possibly Bigfoot related on any of my social media, because I'm the dude with the Bigfoot podcast, right? So if you have a Bigfoot podcast and then you start having experiences and then you start having pictures of things, there's a way that can go. So I'm always I'm skeptical of my own stuff. I've never come out and said that anything that I've ever posted about or showed pictures of was definitely Bigfoot related. And we had Vice come out, and we filmed a television show a couple of years ago, and they filmed on the property for like 7 days. And I've told this story a couple of times on my show, but I was very hesitant about how they were going to edit the show and how it was going to turn out, because it was all about the podcast. It was all about Bigfoot. And I was a little apprehensive because it's Vice, huge network, but they've had a history of doing some shady stuff in the past. So I was a little concerned. The only thing that they edited at all was one portion, because we were filming on the property, and the cameraman who was here filming the pickups actually saw this area on my property that I was aware of. I hiked past it with the dogs almost every day, and it looked very interesting, but I'd never walked in there and looked at it. The cameraman points to it and says, "That looks weird. Like, what's all those sticks together?" So we walk into this part of the woods, and I start looking, and the closer I look, I'm finding like trees, like stuck behind each other and woven behind the other one. And at first glance, it could be deadfall, but it looked really strange. And the closer I looked, it was almost like a little teepee structure inside. So we started unraveling all this. And when it showed up on the show, there was a part where he was filming, and I said, "There's no way that I can say a Sasquatch definitely made this, but it's really weird." But they edited to say, "It looks like me saying a Sasquatch definitely made this," right? But I'll never say that in real life. So that was the first thing, was really finding the sticks and these structures and trees that were stuck behind other trees that doesn't look like natural deadfall. And that was in an area where I ended up finding what I call the gifting stump. I think you and I've talked about that before. I started posting about that on my social media because I walk the dogs past that every single day. And I don't know what, last year there was this bleached white turtle shell was turned over and stuck in the side of this stump. Wasn't there the day before. It didn't die because it's bleached. It's clearly been out in the sun forever. And it's stuck in the side of this stump. And I just thought it was the weirdest thing. So I tried to figure out, I started calling people that I trust. I'm like, "Is this weird?" And they're like, "Well, I've heard of Sasquatch doing that." And I'm like, "Oh my God." So I decided I was going to get a camera. So I put a camera up, and I found another turtle shell that had passed away, and it was still brown. So I put that on the stump. I put a rock out there. I put some peanut butter, sun butter, ground up sunflower seeds, and an apple on a stick. And I put a trail cam up. I didn't put the trail cam up to begin with because people were telling me, if this is a gifting thing, don't put a camera up. They're not going to come in with the camera there. And I'm like, well, I don't know that anybody really knows that for sure, but okay, I'll try that. Nothing happened. Didn't have anything happen. Like 3 days after I put the apple out there, and it was stuck down in the stump on a stick. And I go out to walk the dogs, and I walk by the stump. Everything's still there. No, nothing's moved, except the apple has a huge bite out of two sides of it. It's still stuck on the stick in the stump. It's almost like picking up a candy apple and taking a bite out of two sides of it. And I was freaking out because it's weird. It looks like a human bite. It was a small apple. It wasn't a big apple, but it looks like a small human bite. So I'm sending it to people. I'm texting pictures, and I'm like, what does this look like? Whatever. And they're like, it looks like something took a bite out of the apple. So then I started having sun butter jars disappear. So I put a camera out there, and weird things started happening with the camera. I would go out, the sun butter jar would be gone. The camera took no pictures or no video. It was completely dead. So there was all this weird stuff going on. And I really got away from that. That was before the winter hit, and I really didn't do anything. I just left a rock on the gifting stump, so we really haven't had anything going on there over the last few months. But just a couple of weeks ago on Monday, whatever the last holiday was, that on Monday, I didn't want to do anything Bigfoot. I didn't want to do any show related stuff. We were just going to get out of the house, go on a nice hike. We've got 40 acres, so we love to hike. There's still places that we haven't hiked on the property. I don't know if we'll ever see all of it because we hike different areas every time. So we go out on this hike, and I wasn't even going to take my phone with me. Like, I didn't even want a camera. I didn't want anything, nothing. Didn't even have water. I just strapped a gun on and went. And we're going along, and I start seeing these weird, like, stick structures and what looks like fulcrum type deals and just weird looking stuff. Could be deadfall. I'm like, okay. So we're going up to the back of the ridge, and I crossed over this little creek or a little portion of the creek, and I look down and I see what looks to be a footprint. And I'm like, I was like, I found a footprint. No, my better half's not into this at all. We're hiking. We're not doing Bigfoot stuff. Let's not play games. Right. So I take my phone and I'm like, this is cool. I'm going to take a picture of it, and I literally thought it was a joke. Like, I thought it was a pareidolia foot is what I thought in the water. And then I take a picture of it, and I'm like, I start looking down closer, and I'm like, that's toes. That's sunk in the front. And the longer I looked at it, the more I was like, this is a footprint. So I put my foot in the photo I've got like a size 11 boot, and I put my foot in there for scale, obviously, and I snap a couple of pictures, and we keep going. And then I just kept finding more and more of this, 40, 50 yards away, we find what looks like a nest kind of deal. So I snapped some pictures of that. I find some stacked up rocks, which I thought was really weird. And the stacked up rocks was way at the top of the ridge back there. But just for context, we have 40 acres here. There's about 150 acres, I think, behind us that's nothing but woods. On the back part of the ridge, it goes down into a bowl, and then there's another ridge on the other side of that. And all around our property, there's nothing but other property. It's just woods. It's just wooded property. That's all it is. Our closest neighbor that lives here full time is about a half a mile away. So there shouldn't be anybody back there on my property stacking rocks and doing weird stuff with trees and limbs, and certainly not making what looks like a footprint that I might. Now, again, this is the first time we've ever hiked this part of the property that I might just cross over the creek and find. It just seems a little weird to me, but so yeah. And just a couple of days after that, I think I told you on Sunday, we're in the country, and I like to go out, and I might go out on the porch at 3:00 in the morning, and relieve myself occasionally. And I did that a couple of days after this happened, and we found all this stuff. And it's about 3:15 in the morning. I hear what sounds like four. I think I described them to you. The only thing that comes to mind when I describe what I heard was like power knocks. And they sounded like they're maybe, half mile away on the back of this ridge. Just like pow, 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 pow. and it was loud. And I've never heard anything like that. That's the first time I've ever heard any kind of knocks, right? That's the first thing when I started telling Doug Highcheck a couple of years ago about some of the weird stuff that was happening on the property. The first thing Doug said is, what about tree knocks? Never heard one. We've heard howls. We've heard what sounds like the Ohio howl kind of vocalizations really close to the house. We've heard that in the distance. We've heard other strange vocalizations, but no wood knocking until literally like 3 days after I snapped this picture of what looks like a footprint. So I'm thinking, okay, am I creating this in my mind? Am I going crazy, or is this really happening? Because I was definitely not expecting to find some of the stuff that I found.
To me, it sounds like it's progressing. I mean, like you said, you've never made it to this part of the property before, and then you hop over that side, and then you find the print, and you find the rocks, and you find the structures, and then now they're watching you. That's why you get the knocks. They seen you coming out on that, something seen you come out on your porch, and they knew you were there. In my opinion, again, this is all my opinion of what I've learned over the years, and they're noticing you. And I think, again, that experience when you were young has a lot to do with it. I think, again, that they mark you, and I have no way to prove that, but I've heard story after story after story, and it's not coincidence anymore. With the turtle shell, my buddy, I know 2 other people that have experienced the bleached out turtle shell, and Al, my friend Al, is one of them, and he had moles left in them, like dead moles, put in the turtle shells for him at his gifting area when he was trading with the Sasquatch, or what he assumed was Sasquatch. And so that's not the first time I've ever heard of the turtle shell. So coincidence? I mean, there's many people that are experiencing the same things, and I think you got something that's coming. It's coming, and I can't tell you definitely, but it's coming. So I know you have some pictures. I see you loaded up one of the footprint, what you believe is a footprint, what I believe is a handprint.
Yeah, let me pull up.
You can start with structure one first. That's fine.
Yeah, I thought this was kind of weird. Again, could it be deadfall? Sure. It looks like it could be, but it looks a little suspect to me. I don't know. I leave it open for interpretation, but
all right.
This was not far from where the footprint was, or the alleged possible footprint. And here's some of these are just, could be anything, but I don't know.
Well, what was important about that structure that if people got to, you should left it just a little bit longer, is that center branch is balanced. It's balanced on the other 2 limbs. I mean, that doesn't fall out of a tree and do that in my book. So just to give everybody just a little, that center branch, the top branch there, I think your cursor, if you move it, they can see it. Yep, they can. Just if you point to that center branch right there, that branch right there is balanced. It's not touching on either end. So for that to fall out of a tree like that with the X at the top and the A and all that, again, I just think that, in my opinion, again, I think that has something just manipulating that. It just doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, and it's indicative of other similar things that I found on the property as well. And there's some that are, I was trying to find. Okay, here's a good example. Let me show you this one. And this is something I think I mentioned to you on Sunday that I found weird, because if you find sticks and stuff together, that could have fallen out of trees, sure. But what I try to do when I even have a question about what something could be, right? I look at the trees around it. So that big tree there, I don't know. I'm not a tree expert, but I don't know what kind of tree that is. I know that's a different type of tree. That looks like the same kind of tree as that. I do know that this is a cedar tree or some sort of a cypress tree. It's stuck. It may be hard to see, but it's stuck. There's a limb there that it's stuck behind, and it's wrapped around here. There is no stumps where this came from. There's no cedar trees like this one anywhere in the same vicinity as these trees here. So it was carried from wherever it was picked up and placed there, in my opinion, by somebody or something. So, and again, like I said, if I had found a stump to this tree that was, back in this area down here, it could have easily fallen over and just ended up in that position, sure. But if I can't find the origin of the tree in that general vicinity nearby, that's what really piqued my interest, and that's why I snapped a picture of it. I try to do a little bit of detective work before I, psych myself out. But here's something I found was interesting. I think I showed this to you on Sunday. This is what I thought. I call it a nest. And again, it's like I said to you on Sunday, I'm not a tree expert. I'm not a vegetation expert. So I don't know if that's a natural thing, if whatever this is just grows naturally like that and it's died that way. I don't know. But I found it interesting too that the one thing I noticed about it that I thought was kind of weird is this is stuck between those two trees on this side. And these are stuck through. It's almost like it's some sort of a little structure. I don't know. I just thought it was neat. That's really why I took the picture. But again, the more I looked at it, the weirder it got to me. So,
all right, you can see that the center impression where there's something that's right down in there. There's something that I'll share the one that I have, and you can see the similarities how it's woven in. Now there's the one I got when you can see the middle is woven in, and there's something that's nesting down inside of that. If it's a Sasquatch, I don't know. Yeah. But you can see, look at that. There's yours. There's mine. Yours. It's got the same, this other stick that's coming up and out, the same as yours. There's similarities there. So I think it's pretty fascinating. Now let's go to that print that you found that I think it's a handprint. I think it's a huge handprint, and I think the wrist is enormous. Wait till people see.
The first one here is, I think this is I've got one that's like the original that's a little farther back, and this is it. And then I've got one where I zoomed in a little bit so you can see what I believe are toes. Now, when I first saw this, I was drawn to this area right here because it's kind of hard to see it when it's not zoomed in. That's why I took a zoomed in shot, a screenshot. I'll show you in a second. This looks like 5 toes to me. That's what immediately drew my attention to this was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 toes, right? And it's kind of hard to see, but that's mud there. And from this angle, it's difficult to see, but it's an impression. Like it's probably, I'd say 1.5-ish deep. And I initially thought it looked like a foot or a footprint. And when I texted Doug Highcheck a picture of it, and Doug, of course, immediately sent back, it looks like a possible handprint to me because he pointed out this area right here as possibly being like a thumb, or this area being where the thumb is maybe. And these are knuckle prints here. And I think you said you saw the same thing, Chris. So
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a handprint. I think it really is. Look at the wrist. You can see how at the bottom there, how it comes.
This is a little closer up so people can get a little better view and see.
But again, I'm not a footprint expert or a handprint expert. Yeah, see, I see a hand.
Maybe that's what it is. I don't know. I definitely thought it was strange, man. And it's, I don't know. I've never found anything like that. And like I say, it's not huge. I mean, I tried to get my foot to what I thought maybe either the wrist and or the back of the foot. I was thinking back of the foot at that time. And again, that's a size 11 boot. So I don't know what, 14 inches maybe, give or take. I don't know.
Yeah, I see what you're pointing out, the wrist, and I see that the bottom part of the hand, and I think that's a really big handprint in my book. But again, I'm only speculating. I don't know. I wasn't there to see who made it, what made it, but it's a good print. Whatever that is a print of something. Something either stepped there or walked there or put its hand down there. It's definitely something. So I think on the other side of that creek, you really got something going. Now look at that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that was at the back of the ridge, at the very top of the ridge, at the back of the property. I thought that was really interesting.
Right.
I don't know.
It almost looks like an old grave though, too, with that big stone underneath it. I don't know. Maybe the previous landowners maybe buried something there. I don't know.
Yeah.
But again, I don't know.
I thought it was interesting, man.
Well, you put that in the structures together and the handprint and the footprint, and what does it equal? It equals Sasquatch.
Yeah. Here's another. There's two different. What I thought maybe versions of what I thought was cool that looked like a nest. So that's like the last really interesting picture I'll pull up. This was, I don't know, maybe 100 yards away from the first one that I thought was a nest. So I just snapped a picture of it. Again, could be something totally natural I'm just not aware of, but I just thought it was really cool.
I think that looks like a blind. Like a type of a blind that they weaved. That just doesn't grow like that.
Weird stuff, man. Weird stuff.
It's weaved in. And so what's your approach? What's your plan on approaching this? Are you gonna just let it happen, or are you gonna start trading with them, or what's your plans?
Well, I definitely, after we talked on Sunday, I want to go back and at least start putting stuff back on the gifting stump, just in case that's what's happening. I don't know. I definitely want to be an involved party if something's going on. And I do want to spend more time out in the woods. I've considered maybe even doing a few expeditions on, maybe even inviting people that maybe have a little bit more field experience than I do to come on the property and maybe look at sign or seeing maybe some things that I'm not seeing. But again, it's one of those things where it doesn't seem like I have to go very far and I find something interesting, a fulcrum type, something balanced on top of something else, or stuck behind something that just doesn't look right. I don't know. And again, I always go to Occam's razor and I try to say, well, is that natural? Is it deadfall? Is it something else? I don't know. So I definitely want to pursue it. And the footprint, I have to be honest, I think I told you Sunday, it really got me to the point where I'm convinced now that something's going on and I want to know what it is. Right? Even more so than I had questions before. I certainly have questions now, because if that is in fact a handprint or a footprint or whatever it is, I want to know what made it. And I'd love to see what it is and, maybe capture some evidence. I don't know.
I would just start leaving recorders out. Got a buddy, Flat Rock. I don't know if you know him.
I do.
Yeah, he's got some amazing stuff he's captured, and recently he's got something standing and then crawling away on all fours, and there's no bears where he's at, and I don't know what it is, but he's got some he got it off his baby camera. He's holding it out his window. But he's got some awesome recordings. He's actually donated for the 369 page, and so that's where I would start with the recorder and just leaving the recorder out, because that seems to work the best. I mean, other than you start with trail cameras and it doesn't seem to do too good. But again, we've always had luck with recorders, leaving them out. I've left them out in a couple places, and we've gotten some good results. So that would be my suggestion, to start and see where they're on the property and see where they're not. Obviously you have something there. So I can't wait to see more and hear more about it. As everybody else, I'm addicted to this stuff, and I love to hear everybody else's interactions and all that stuff and what's going on in other people's properties. So I'm going to open up the questions for Brian. If you guys got any questions for Brian about his property or the podcast or anything like that, in capital letters. We're approaching the 1 hour mark here pretty soon. So I want to say thank you for coming and joining us on a Tuesday night and taking time out of your schedule. And I really appreciate it very much. And It's been very, very learning a lot tonight. So thank you so much.
Al said that, yeah, Al, you're right. I do have a ton of pictures. I've only shown a few from a couple of different angles, but yeah, he's suggesting when you come across something like that, the structures and whatnot, take pictures from every angle. I was out taking some pictures yesterday of some stuff that I found in a different area, and I'll take 6 or 8 pictures just about from every angle. I try to get below it, above it, to the side. So Al is definitely correct.
Yeah, that's my buddy Al. He's the one that helps me out. He's been doing this for a long time, and you learn a lot from I shouldn't call them old timers, but the guys that have been doing it for 34, like Don Monroe. Don Monroe is 86 years old, and he's still crawling in caves.
Wow.
Still crawling in caves, 86 years old. I mean, and he's been with Renee. He's been with all the guys you mentioned at the beginning. He's got pictures with him. He's been on expeditions with them all. You learn a lot from them guys. They have a lot of wisdom, and I always listen to my elders and listen to people that want to help you out, and I appreciate it all too. So
yeah, Al's great. He's been on with Wayne and Lisa over on our Paranormal Odyssey show a couple of times, and I've actually aired those episodes on Sasquatch Odyssey after he's interviewed with Wayne and Lisa. So he's always got great stories and good stuff.
Yeah, he's a good guy. All right, we got a question from BF Bud. Any activity close to your house, yard, etc., and how long have you lived there?
BF Bud, I do not have a yard, partner. It is all woods here. I haven't mowed the grass in 6 years, so we are definitely fortunate. I feel like we're fortunate in that. As far as the closest activity, I would have to say is some of the stick structures and the gifting stump that we were talking about where the turtle shell showed up is probably 600 yards or so from the house, maybe a little less, maybe 500 or 600 yards from the house. And I guess the closest activity would probably be the vocalization that we heard about 50 yards from the house. And that was about a year and a half or so ago. Ohio howl type, really loud, aggressive, like Ohio howl type vocalization with like a little bark on the end. And I estimated that was probably 40 or 50 yards into the woods behind the house.
Okay, that was a good question. Boots on the Ground with Barb has a question. Have you tried to communicate verbally, just talking out loud as you hike?
Not until about 3 days ago. That's the first time I'd ever done that. I literally went out and just said, okay, if you're out here, just make yourself known. And I wasn't loud. I was almost a whisper, but it was more of like frustration, right? Because I'm finding this stuff and I feel like something's on the cusp and I'm not getting what I want. So yes, just literally like 3 days ago on a hike, I said that very thing. But I've done that before. I've heard that with UFO stuff. You know, there's this whole fifth dimension kind of, or fifth kind or whatever, that people are manifesting these incidents with UFOs. And I've done that before. I've sat out on the porch and was like, you know, I'd love to see you guys again. I've seen a UFO in the past. I'd love to see another one. If you're there, show yourself. Hasn't worked yet, but I'm going to keep trying it.
We're gonna have to have you come back and discuss the activity at the house with the spirits and the UFO stuff and all that jazz too, and get into that too, because that's all part of the same cycle, I believe. All right. Speaking of the Squatch Father himself, he has a question. When Brian is out on his property, does he get any gut feelings?
Typically, no. It happened to me, like, I think it was Sunday before you and I talked, Chris. I joked because I'd been watching episodes, like reruns of Gold Rush. I love that show. And I hadn't watched it in forever. So I was watching some Gold Rush and I ended up out making myself a gold pan, and I was out panning for gold in our creek. Didn't find any. I'm still not rich. So, but I got this really strange feeling that I was being watched. I got pretty deep into the woods. Our creek run, we've got 2 creeks on the property that run the whole length of the property. And I got pretty deep out in the woods away from the house. And I just started having this really weird feeling like I was being watched. And like I said, I think I told you Sunday, I joked it could have been a squirrel. You know, I don't know. But that's the first time I've ever really had that feeling, was just on Sunday for the very first time. So
sounds like things are happening. On this weekend was a big turnaround. That's what it sounds like.
And I don't think I answered the other part of the question. We've owned this property for, I think, 7 years, and we've lived here now. I think we're going into our 3.5, 4 years living here full time. So,
all right. Ms. Diane Fowler asks, what is the closest encounter you've had? And do you think, what is the closest encounter you've ever had?
I think it was the vocalization that we had, like I said, about 1.5 years ago. It was about 40 or 50 yards into the woods behind the house that I know of. I mean, that was pretty obvious. It was definitely something. I don't know what it was, but it was definitely something making a really loud noise that I'd never heard before. And I don't think it was a bear. I don't think it was a cat. And it certainly wasn't a dog. So.
Okay. And Mr. Michael Nelson Jr. asked, what is your most favorite moment?
I don't know. You might have to be a little more specific.
Would that be on the show, Michael, or was that in the woods, or
yeah, we might have to narrow that down. That could be a loaded question.
Yeah. He's part of my team. He's one of the guys that goes out investigating with us. Yeah, Diane, we'll link everything in the woods, he said. Your most moment in the woods.
I would have to say it was finding what I believe to be the footprint and the stuff that I found a couple of Mondays ago. I mean, that's the most exciting thing. I mean, like I said, I found the gifting stump stuff was really exciting, but again, it could be anything. But when you find what you think is maybe a foot or a handprint, that was really exciting for me because that's something tangible. Like it's not subjective at all. Like something made that print or something put that there. I just don't know what it is. You know, when a jar of peanut butter gets taken or something, it could be a big raccoon. We've got some really big raccoons out here that hang around the property. We've seen some really fat ones. So sure, could it be one of them dragging off a peanut butter jar? Absolutely. Raccoon didn't make whatever that print is that I showed you guys pictures of. That's for sure.
All right. Michael says, thank you. Yeah. Put a rock on top of that peanut butter jar. And if the rock's underneath where that peanut butter jar was, it wasn't a raccoon. Yeah. Diana, we'll link all Brian's stuff tomorrow in the description. I think the link is in the description right now. But I will double check and make sure you guys get everything. They always do it the next day. So, I think we're winding down on the questions. Everybody says, thanks for answering the questions. It's a good crowd tonight. I appreciate all you guys always in the chat. You guys always keep it nice and clean, and there's no drama. And we don't like drama at Discover Sasquatch. It's just takes away from the subject. Drama just kills everything around it, and then it just ruins everybody for the whole time. So I appreciate all you guys that show up every week. Yeah, Boots on the Ground says it's in the description. So Janelle Lee says, great interview. Thank you, Brian and Chris, for having them on. Has been very interesting. Well, thank you so much for stopping in, Janelle. It's much appreciated. So before you leave, what do you got coming up? What's the big plans for the future?
Oh, we got all kinds of stuff going on, man. We're talking to the History Channel right now to try to get a television show going about the podcast and some of these amazing encounters that we've documented. So I think we're finishing up the second round of the pitch document for that, and it should go to them. I'm excited about that. I put together an amazing field team, and I hope it comes to fruition because we can really get out in the field and do some of those follow-up investigations. And we've got some conferences coming up. I'll be at the Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Conference next month. I think it's July 22nd or 23rd in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. I'll be on stage there. They got a huge lineup. Cliff Barrickman's going to be there, Matt Moneymaker, Renee Holland. They just added Adam Davies. Lori Wade from the BFRO is going to be there. Ryan Golombeski, RPG, is going to be the MC. I'm going to be handling the onstage encounters portion of that show. It's a huge conference. If anybody's in that area and you haven't been to the Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Conference, you're missing out. It's a huge event. There's about 7,000 people there. And we're going to have all the Paranormal Odyssey, or we're going to have all of the Paranormal World Productions folks there. I'll be there. Wayne from the Paranormal Odyssey will be there. We're going to have the Kentucky X-Files guys are going to be there. The Basement Hangout guys are going to be there. So it's going to be pretty much the whole Paranormal World Productions team will be there hanging out. We'll have a booth. And when I'm not on stage, I will be in the booth as well. And then I'm going to be speaking at the Idaho Squatch Con in August 26th, I believe that is. If you're in the Idaho area, I would highly suggest coming to the Squatch Con. It's going to be cool. It's going to be me, Cliff Barrickman, Dr. Jeff Meldrum's going to be on the panel. And I think we're adding one more. I don't want to say that just yet because I don't think it's been finalized, but I think we're adding one more person. We're going to have some pretty interesting discussions, let's say, about some of the evidence and some of the things that are out there and just talk all things Bigfoot. So that's really all I got going on over the next couple of months. And then obviously we put out 3 shows a week on Sasquatch Odyssey. So there's always something for everybody. I've got some really cool conversations I've had with people recently. The Henry Franzoni episode will be out in the next couple of weeks. So you guys can check us out on YouTube. We got a YouTube channel or anywhere you get your podcast.
Cool. Yeah. Make sure everybody go on over to YouTube and subscribe. Give them some Discover Sasquatch love. All right. Well, I want to say thank you for taking the time again out of your Tuesday night, sharing with us here at Discover Sasquatch. The chat loved it. Chat had a good time. I had a great time. It was very interesting. You want to hang out back for a couple minutes while I say goodbye to everybody, and I'll say goodbye after that.
Awesome. I appreciate it, everybody. Thank you, Chris.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Brian King Sharp. All right. What a great show tonight was. You learn a lot. Doing the podcast isn't very easy stuff. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into it. I'm glad that he shared a little bit about that and a little bit about the stuff that's going on in his house. And things aren't coincidence in the Sasquatch world. It happens to many. The turtle shells, I know 2 other people. When you're young, they come and approach you. You might not see them, but later on in life, you'll catch that feeling once again. Coincidence has left my vocabulary. It's not coincidence anymore. It's just the way things are. It's just the way that happen. So I just want to say thank you for everybody being here tonight. Don't forget the Hand of Unknown Origin. This is going to be a good show. The hand still exists, and we will be showing it on July 5th. We have some major evidence that they didn't have it the first time that came out. We got backstories. We got letters, x-rays. It's going to be a really good show. So thank you all for coming. As Larry always says, get in the woods, people.